Assalamu alaikum. A wonderful day, all of you. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Institution of Global Professional Pre-International webinar in IGP. Thank you all for joining with us in this wonderful morning. My lovely audience, today I am your host for this morning. I am Tamrul from Bangladesh. Ladies and gentlemen, I am proud to be associated with IGP as a global member. I feel honored to host this webinar, and it's my delight to welcome to you all in our IGP platform. Thank you all for joining today in this marvelous morning, and it's my humble request to share this webinar with your friends, and don't forget to tag, share, and mention your friends. So let's together and learn together. We have successfully completed our 381 webinar. Today, we'll be presenting webinar number 382, and the topic is Gender and Multinational Corporation Escape from Accountability. Today, we have a wonderful and energetic speaker from India. Today, our speaker name is Dr. Miranda Das, and she is a assistant professor, Department of Political Science, Patna Women College from Patna. Let's welcome our ma'am. Hello, ma'am. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for your thank you for giving
Thank,
me this opportunity.
thank you, ma'am, for joining and give your valuable time with us. Ma'am, give a short description about yourself, then you can start your presentation.
Okay. Okay, my name is Dr. Miranda Das. I teach political science at Patna Women's College, Patna, which is in the state of Bihar, India. I've done my studies from Jawaharlal Nehru University. I've earned my MA, MPhil, and PhD degree from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, India. And I mostly work in the area of gender studies. And my main area of interest include migration, gender and migration, feminist legal research, and also feminist international relations scholarship. So, this is the broad area in which I work. Today, I'll be focusing on multinational corporations. I'll try to explain what multinational corporation is, and we'll try to explain some of the complexities involved with multinational corporations, especially when we try to understand multinational corporation from a gender point of view. So that is it from my end. I hope you have a wonderful you benefited out of my lecture. Thank you all for joining, and thank you, Institute of Global Professionals, for giving me this opportunity. Okay, just let me know when I am to start my presentation.
Okay, ma'am, you can start your presentation now.
Okay. Okay, thank you. As I've already mentioned, the topic for presentation today is gender and multinational corporations escape from accountability. Before I start, I would like to inform the audience over here that, insofar as the structure of this presentation is concerned, it is divided into four or five parts. Yeah, five parts. First part of the presentation would deal with explaining what multinational corporation means, and will also try to provide some sort of a historical account regarding the origin of multinational corporations. Then we'll try and understand what the term gender means and the complexity associated with understanding gender, and also a brief historical outline regarding the origin of women working in corporations. Then I'll move on to I'll take some case studies from modern multinational corporations and try to point out or foreground gender discriminations that has taken place in some of the well-known multinational corporations. In the final part of my presentation, before conclusion, of course, is to briefly explain or briefly outline the regulations that are there regarding multinational corporations and the loopholes or the lacuna that exists in the regimes or standards that is there through which multinational corporations can be held accountable. And finally, I'll sum up with the conclusion. To begin with, what is a multinational corporation? To simply explain or to keep things at the simple level, a multinational corporation is a corporation or a company, some even call it company, which operates in more than one country. Such corporations have their headquarters in one country, but they have their subsidiary operations in multiple countries, often more than two countries. In this sense, multinational corporations regard the entire world as their market. However, when we try to understand multinational corporations in an academic sense, in a literary sense, there are two definitional problems that one encounters when one tries to understand what a multinational corporation is. First, definitional problem is about what is it called? Is it called a firm, enterprise, corporation, or company? So there's some disagreement among scholars while using these terms in order to explain what a multinational corporation is. Firm basically is applied uh, when applied. The term firm, when applied to multinational corporation, is 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 believed to be misleading because it is often attached to classical economic theories. The term enterprise, it applies some sort of a creative combination of labor and capital. And this is in contrast to what contemporary reality of modern corporation is, which in its procedure is highly bureaucratized. Then comes the word company, which implies a lesser degree of formality than the modern corporations, which has its own, which is chartered and also has a legal personality in law. And therefore, the term that I believe is more appropriate is corporations. The second definitional problem is regarding the use of the term transnational, multinational, or global. Transnational, when we say or use, generally it means something that is operating over and above nations and borders. So the term transnational indicates or it means operations of a company or a corporation that is over and above nations and borders. Global, when we say, it implies global operations. However, and therefore, I believe this term global corporations is not appropriate as many multinational corporations operate not globally, meaning not all over the world, but only in a select number of countries. Therefore, for the purpose of my study or for the purpose of this presentation, the term that I have chosen is multinational corporations. And what I mean basically by multinational corporation in this presentation or otherwise also, that it is a corporation which refer to a specific group of corporation, which refers to a specific corporation, which could be one corporation or group of corporations which has a direct operation in more than one country. However, it has a centralized structure with its head office in home country and subsidiary operations, subsidiary functioning in several other countries known as the host country. The products in such a corporations are decided and developed by the head office, which is located in the home country, home state, and subsidiary offices, however, have the options to adapt to local market requirements. The examples of multinational corporations could be Coca-Cola, Ford, Nestle, McDonald's, Nike, Shell, Adidas, just to name a few. With this brief introduction about what a multinational corporation means, I would like to delve a little deeper into history, rather, go a little deeper in history by discussing the origin of corporations. Now, the starting point of corporations can be traced back to the early 17th century Europe, and in which it was viewed as some sort of a privilege granted by monarch to group of investors, and this privilege was granted to finance trade missions. So how has corporations come into existence? It came into existence in the form of a privilege granted to whom? Granted to investors. Granted by whom? Granted by monarchs, for the objective or the purpose, for the purpose of trade missions. So but therefore, by actually by establishing a corporation, the investors were granted, or their liability were limited, the liability to investment was limited. These privileges are granted to corporations and not to ordinary citizens, and such granting of privileges to corporations serve the interest of the monarch as well as the investor. And the rationale behind granting of such privilege, or to say right, is that the investors, in order to invest, they had to travel to new world or to look for new locations. And such traveling or journey was perilous due to natural calamities, and also therefore investment in new areas was not seen as a safe, was not considered safe. Also, apart from travel and journey, there were several contending European traders who often fought with each other at the sea. And in case they are able to, the investors are able to deal with travel related hazards and their enemy traders, and they arrive at new world or a new area, the native traders oppose them, and they have to deal with the opposition on the part of the native traders. So there are a lot of problem that an investor has to tackle, and in order to uh, give some sort of a remedy or some sort of a safeguard, the idea of granting privilege or right to corporations came up in the Europe in the 17th century. One of the earliest example of a corporation is the Massachusetts Bay Company, which was chartered by King Charles the First in 1628. And the King Charles chartered Massachusetts Bay Company to colonize the new world on behalf of the king. So the objective was to establish colonization, colonialism, or mercantile economy as we know. And this was done through chartering companies. Companies were given some sort of a legal provisions, legal rights, and these companies then go on to colonize new world on behalf of the monarch, which grant them such rights or privileges. Most of the European countries which were involved in colonization and mercantile economy were Holland, Spain, France, and England in the early 17th century. And one of the a well-known historical account of such a company is the connection between, so I'm sorry, the connection between company and monarch could be understood because these companies which are given rights and privileges, what they did in exchange for the monarch was to increase the wealth and power of the monarch. The companies turned colonies, the newly acquired colonies, into sources of raw materials as well as markets for selling finished products. The best example we have is the British East India Company, which is a colonial state monopoly operating under different names for almost 300 years. Their headquarters were located in the metropolitan state, in the country where the surplus benefits or the surpluses were dispatched. Now, this British East India Company is one of the earliest multinational corporations that we can easily pinpoint when we try to look at the origins of corporations. Now, this is a brief background about what a multinational corporation is, the definitional problem that one sees, or encounters when dealing with multinational corporations in an academic setting, the scholarship, the literatures, and how the literatures uses different terms for indicating something which we know as MNC or multinational corporations today. And also the also about how this corporation came up at a certain point in history and what was the rationale behind such corporations coming up at a historical point. Now let us understand what is gender. So when we try to understand gender, there's this debate about sex and gender. I'm sure most of us are already aware of this debate about what sex mean and what gender means. Sex is a biological categorization and it is primarily based on reproductive potential. So, based on our reproductive potential, based on our anatomical conditions, based on our anatomy, chromosome features, we belong to one sex or the other. Whereas gender is the social elaboration of biological sex. So, to explain further, sex is based on a combination of anatomy and chromosome. So, our body and our chromosome make us uh, X sex or Y sex. But our understanding of ourselves and others as male or female is social. So, sex is a biological construct, so to say, and gender is a social construct. Now, when we try to apply gender or understand gender or use gender in order to understand for, let's say, multinational corporation, we need to take into account that there is intersectionality of gender. Meaning, when we try to understand gender, we also need to intersect. This understanding also needs to intersect with the understanding of caste, class, age, nationality, and so on. To explain a little bit more, the fact of being a woman, a fact of being a black woman, white woman, middle class woman, rich women, young women, old women, they all change. And our understanding about a certain event, certain phenomena, certain concept changes when we look at it from different standpoint. So today, when we say we need to understand gender, we do not only need to understand gender, but we need to understand the intersectionality of other categories like caste, class, age, nationality, and so on, in order to come up with a holistic understanding, in order to come up with a wholesome understanding. Now, when I say gender in multinational corporations, or to explain or make sense of multinational corporation from a gender point of view, gender perspective, there could be two way of doing it. One is feministic and the other is non-feministic. Now, for example, if you are trying to look at pure statistics, as in how many women workers are working in a particular multinational corporation in a particular point of time, and we are only concerned with number, we are only concerned with statistics, that could be a non feministic way of looking at gender in multinational corporation. It is pure statistics. It's only about numbers. We are just trying to look at how many men, how many women. So it's a non feministic way. It could be categorized within the study of gender in multinational corporation, but it does not necessarily is a feministic way of looking at it. On the other hand, if we are trying to look at the unique experiences that a women worker has in a multinational corporation, is have women worker have in a multinational corporation, that could be categorized as a feministic way of looking at it. So these are two ways. Gender, when we apply gender lens to understanding anything, it does not necessarily mean that it has to be feministic. It could be non-feministic as well as could be categorized within larger gender studies or gender scholarship. Now, let us also briefly look at the history of women working at corporations. When did it start? So, this will just give you a synoptic overview about when things start, how things started in the Western countries and how things started in my own country, India. So, until 1900 and until 20th century, First World War, corporation related factory works were considered men's job, and very few women were employed in this corporations. However, once World War One began, things started to change. There was significant increase in the number of women employed in factories of big corporations, and these women filled in a number of roles. They were doing all sorts of work. They ran drill presses, did welding, operated cranes, used screw machines, and all kinds of works. So women entered corporations since the early 20th century, and it was to meet the demands of war productions. And it was during this period, 1914 to 1918, many corporations hired women. In 1918, in the United States, Women in Industry Services was created. It later became a division of the Department of Labor and was headed by uh, uh, yeah, and was headed by Mary Van Cleek, who was actually a college educated woman and was an ardent feminist. Now, Women in Industry Services was established to solve a temporary problem, but it later became a permanent member of the Department of Labor in 1920 and was named as Women's Bureau. So 1920 is also the year in which women were granted the right to vote. So the year 1920 is a significant one. Why? Because politically women were given the right to vote, and also there was a specific permanent department or part which was created, division which was created within the United States of America's Department of Labor, which was known as the Women's Bureau. And in the Indian context, the history of women working in corporations, and to use the term more appropriately, factories. Women working in factories could be traced back to 1818, which is almost 100 year before things started in the United States of America. So a group of women, girls basically, were brought to Bengal, which is in India, from Lancashire. They were called a group of Lancashire girls, and they were brought in to introduce factory methods of work. These women were skilled weavers, and so they were brought in so that the factory method of work could be introduced in Bengal, in India. And the first Factories Act was established or founded in 1881. And this was not Mark Carpenter, this is Mary Carpenter. And Mary Carpenter played a pivotal role. A woman played a pivotal role in bringing up the first Factories Act in 1881. The discourse or discussion about working condition of women in factories, it started in Indian scholarship as well as Indian academia, or in general discussion, after 1919, when Washington Convention was adopted, which which placed some limit on working hours. The working hours was restricted to 8 hours a day. With this, the conditions of women in which the condition of women who were working in extreme bad conditions in factories during the 17th century was started. A discussion was started. It began a point of scholarly attention. Now, with this brief historical background, I would like to draw your attention to certain gendering aspects that modern multinational corporations have. Now, what are these gendering aspects? First is, modern multinational corporations are seen to be based on gender division of labor, not just in terms of work, but also in terms of physical spaces. So there are these export processing zones, which are seen as material incarnation of gender segregation. So export processing zones are actually assembly lines where mass production takes place. People standing in assemblies or lines, they are continuously into producing a certain type of product. So these assembly lines, these export processing zones, actually are in an area which is gated, as in there's a particular area in a factory which is called export processing zone or assembly line, and there's a gate to it, And most of the women working in export processing zones, in textile, in electric goods, they are women. uh, and there is also a separate provision, a separate office for male, for supervisors, for managers who are mostly local males or foreign males. There are also gender images. There's also multinational corporation, and their work also entail or portray some sort of a gender image. This whole idea of nimble fingers. Women are seen as nimble fingers, fragile, flexible hands, appropriate for quick work, multitasking. So they are placed in export processing zones because of their nimble fingers. So they're placed in one area, one physical space. Men, the image of men is that of a physically powerful and potentially violent. And this image is justified on the ground that they need to manage work and also to diffuse labor unrest, if any. So there is a gender division insofar as space in a corporation's factory is concerned, images with which women workers and men workers are portrayed. And the third gendering aspect, which is getting greater attention now, is that of benevolent patriarchy. As in multinational corporations and the factories of multinational corporations, the managers are often presented as protectors or caretakers of young women workers. So the young women workers is working in assembly line, they have managers, and these managers are somehow given the responsibility of protecting or taking care of young women workers. They lay down the rules, they take care of the code of conduct. So in a way, this is often referred to as benevolent patriarchy. And this was mostly pointed out in the literatures about Mexican maquiladoras in the 80s and 90s. This is an example of I'm sorry. This is an example of an assembly line, how women work in Delphi maquiladora, and they are under a manager who's responsible for their well-being, for their wages, for their working hours, for their conduct. So this has been pointed out by many scholars as something like something which they term as benevolent patriarchy. So that's the third gendering aspect of multinational corporations. With this, I come to the next part or next theme of my presentation, which is to look at some of the case studies about gender discrimination at multinational corporations. So the first multinational corporation, one of the earliest multinational corporations, is Colgate Palmolive. We all are aware of it, which is a famous soap manufacturing company. It was founded in 1806, and it was a huge US company which later bought soap manufacturers in Britain, France, and Germany. And Colgate Palmolive has its headquarters in the United States and its subsidiary operations in Sweden, Italy, Poland, and Switzerland. In Colgate Palmolive, women workers have been working for a long period of time. But one aspect, one gender discriminatory aspect of Colgate Palmolive that has been pointed out, and there were protests against it, and which has been sufficiently portrayed in literature as well as in the media, is that women workers were denied right to work on better paying jobs. The jobs, the positions which were better paying, women were denied to those positions, even if their qualifications, even if their job experience entitled them to such positions. Colgate Palmolive denied such women workers to such positions. Why? They argue, the argument or the justification given by Colgate Palmolive is that such positions occasionally, not always, occasionally require lifting of some weight. How much weight? Over 35 pounds, which, if I convert to kilograms, would be somewhere around 15 to 16 kilograms. So because the better paying positions require occasional lifting of weight, Colgate Palmolive believe that women cannot be placed in such positions. They need to be placed in the subordinate positions where no weight lifting is involved. So this was one ground. This just justification is a bizarre one and a banal one, but for this justification, with this justification, Colgate Palmolive denied women to better paying positions, to better paying jobs within their corporations. So there's this protest which was held against Colgate Palmolive for their discriminatory attitude towards women workers. The next case study is that of Lenders, Ferry and Clark. So this is basically a corporation or a company which was initially involved in producing houseware, cutlery, kitchenware, and similar stuff. It was founded in the year 1865 in Connecticut. However, when the First World War broke out, the corporation was shifting to producing war commodities, war goods, and they were given a contract by the US government to produce gas mask because of chemical warfare. This corporation had taken the task, has shifted their productions from houseware to war goods, mostly gas mask, in order to protect one from chemical gases. And they were given around 300,000 order of 300,000 gas mask to be produced in a time frame of 30 days. So within 30 days, Lenders, Freddie, and Clark had to produce 300,000 gas masks for the US government. And to meet this target, Lenders, Freddie, and Clark employed women as well as young school children. So there was blatant violation of labor laws. Women's young school going children were involved in producing 300,000 gas masks. Women were involved. They were hired to produce such gas masks. And this figure and this time frame can give us an idea about the working condition these young children and women must have been subjected to. This is the gas mask that these young school going children and women were producing during World War One by Lenders Freddie and with Lenders Freddie and Clark. Now, the third case study is that of Ford Motor Company. Ford Motor Company was founded in the year 1903. However, until 1918, until the First World War, there were no women workers in Ford companies or factories. They began hiring women in August 1918 during World War One. Their working conditions in Ford Motor Company is extremely, extremely miserable. Women were made to stand in assembly lines for hours and hours and hours. They were not allowed to talk because the corporation owners believed that if their employees were engaging in conversations, they might be distracted and the quality of product might be hampered. Because of which, workers were not allowed to take any break. They were not allowed to have any conversation with their co-workers. They had to stand in the assembly line for hours together and produce the same thing repetitively, monotonously, day in and day out. So because of this condition, the workers, especially the women workers, they have they've 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 developed this habit of speaking without even moving their lips. So they spoke to one another, standing their co-workers standing next to them without even moving their lips or having any facial expression. This came to be known as Fordization of the face. This is a very well-known expression. When one says Fordization of the face, it means that you're speaking, you're communicating with someone without any facial expression, without moving your lips, so that your employer, your boss, doesn't get to know about it. So, such was the condition, such was the control of factory owners on these women. Now, when World War II ended, these thousands of women who were working with Ford Motor Company during World War One, they continued to work till World War II. However, when World War II ended, the men returned to their jobs. The women were laid off, and not just one or two, thousands of women were laid off from the corporations, from the factory work. So this is a Ford Motor Company during World War One, and this is how in an assembly line, workers, both men and women, had to stand and do their work in a repetitive way, in a monotonous way, without talking to one another, without communicating with one another, without any sort of distractions, so to say. So they were sort of a machine. Just as a machine will do its work without any expression, without laughing, without crying, without anything, without taking toilet breaks. Similarly, Ford Motor Company wanted their employees, wanted their workers to do or function in a similar way. A more recent example of gender discrimination or gender violation of gender labor laws is associated with companies, factories of factories manufacturing for companies, corporations like Nike, Puma, Essex, VF corporations, and others. So there was this incident which was reported in 2013. So this incident of mass fainting in Cambodia. So women workers were fainting in mass numbers. There were mass fainting of women workers in Cambodia, especially in factories that were producing or manufacturing for Nike, Puma, Essex, and VF corporations. And these mass fainting reports were reported in 2013, 2017, 2018, and also, I believe, in 2016. So hundreds of women workers fainted. Why they fainted? Because they had long hours of work, 10 hours of shift for 6 days a week. And such tedious, such long hours they were subjected to work that their body enters a stage of extreme fatigue, because of which hundreds of women workers started fainting. And this report started coming in from 2013 onwards, despite the fact that the Washington Convention clearly tells the work hours to be limited to 8 hours, not 10 hours. It was restricted, it was decreased from 10 hours to 8 hours. Yet, factories manufacturing for these big multinational corporations violated such labor standards. Also, these women were made to work under high temperature. There was no ventilation in the factories. There no, in order to save electricity and costs, there were no fans, ceiling fans, table fans, ACs, or any other kinds of cooling devices. They got exhausted and hungry. Why? Also because they're very poorly paid. Their conditions were also related to wage. They were not given any living wage. Now, what is a living wage? A living wage is a wage which ensures that the worker could afford basic necessities: food, shelter, clothing. So that's called basic living wage. So basically, every worker working should be given living wage so that he is able to afford the basic necessities for himself and for himself, herself, or him or his or her family, which is, you all can say, is also a minimum wage. So the international standard is 300 gbp living wage, but these women workers were given a monthly wage of 120 gbp, which is much less than 300 gbp. And there was also provision of overtime. In case a women worker wanted to overtime, do some kind of overtime, let's say 2 hours, then they were able to earn 150 to 190 gbp as wage, which is still less than 300 gbp, which is the minimum wage or the living wage. So already the working hours was 10. 2 hours of overtime. In case a needy worker, women worker, wanted to earn little more for her family, she had to do a 12 hours of work. And then she's not able to earn the minimum living wage, much less than the minimum living wage. Such conditions, malnutrition, resulted in this incident of mass fainting in Cambodia. There's similar incident in Nike's factories, which is called Nike's sweatshop policy. What is this sweatshop policy? It was mostly in Vietnam that this sweatshop policy was, in a way, reported. So, sweatshop policy basically involves wage theft, which means on record, on paper, women workers are paid much more, but the contractors, the managers, they do some sort of a theft, and they only pay a certain share of the actual wage to the women worker. There was also forced overtime which is not voluntary but forced by the managers or factory owners. There was restrictions on toilet use. For instance, a women worker is allowed to use toilet once or maximum twice in a shift of 10 hours to 12 hours. They were exposed to toxic solvents, and also padlock exit doors. Once they enter the assembly zone, the production unit, the doors are locked from outside, they're padlocked from outside, so that they are not able to go out for frequent toilet breaks or other breaks. So such policies is known as sweatshop policy. And such policies, there's massive outrage by civil society groups, human rights activists, feminist activists against Nike's sweatshop policies in, particularly in Vietnam. So this is just a image to give you some idea about sweatshop protest against Nike factories and Nike's production unit. Now, with this idea of gender based violations, violation of labor standards, human rights standards, gender discrimination, we also need to know about what can be done to hold these multinational corporations accountable. What is it that we have? What are the standards? And what is the regulatory framework that is there? I would not deal the legality of it entirely. It is also outside my scope of expertise. However, I'll only give you some broad idea about the loopholes that are there insofar as regulating multinational corporations are concerned. So as I've already mentioned, and as you know by now, that a multinational corporation is such a corporation which operates in more than two countries. Its headquarter is in the home country. For example, if it is an American multinational corporation, its home country will be America, and its subsidiary operations could be anywhere. It could be in India, it could be in Bangladesh, it could be in Vietnam, Thailand, anywhere. So basically, regulation of such corporations which operate in more than two or three or four or a number of countries. So the first regulation or the first option that one has is about home state's law or home state legal provisions. However, it has been seen that home state lacks specific regimes for foreign companies or companies in foreign soil. For example, if it is a multinational corporation of United States of America, the internal laws, the national laws of America lacks specific regimes for dealing with corporations or employees operating in a foreign soil in a foreign country. So they use what? They use internal law as an alternative. However, in most of the internal laws, if we take the example of USA, because USA, most of the top multinational corporations are from the United States of America, we see that such internal laws of US, there is an appeal for immunity from the laws of host state. So if it is a multinational corporation of America, so the American corporation will appeal for immunity. They'll ask for some sort of a privilege, some sort of a immunity in order to operate in a foreign country, in order to operate in a foreign soil. So this immunity is often granted in the form of out clause. For example, for a national corporation, labor laws are there and it can hold the corporation and its employees accountable. The same law cannot or might not be applied to multinational corporations and its employees operating in a foreign soil. So there is this out clause, which is sort of grant immunity in case there is infringement of laws at the host state, not at the home state, at the host state where the subsidiary operation is taking place. Also, in most of the corporations, gender unequal treatment is justified or permitted if it is seen necessary for the functioning of the multinational corporations. So these multinational corporations sometimes argue that we are required to treat or to have some sort of an unequal treatment based on gender. Why? Because it is necessary, it is important for us as a multinational corporation to function. It is to the very basic functioning. It relates to the functioning of our organization, our corporation, and therefore it is important. And in such situation, because of out clause, because of immunity that is granted to corporations and its employees in a foreign soil, they could escape violation of labor standards, violation of gender, and human rights. The next option is that of the laws of the host state. Main ho- mean many times the host state also guarantee, um, basically what I'm trying to say is that the host state laws are also insufficient. Why? Because the host state generally are not willing to intervene between local workers and multinational corporations. They are also granted some sort of immunity from local labor laws. Why such sort of an arrangement is important? Because there's always the risk of multinational corporations packing their bags and moving away, and therefore host countries often condone or turn a blind eye to gender based violations on the ground of human rights. So there are national laws at place in the host country, but they guarantee some kind of immunity because they want to attract investments, and in case their stringent labor laws, then the multinational corporations might leave the host country at any moment. Fearing that, the host countries often relaxes their national laws and do not hold multinational corporations accountable. So host the third option after laws of the home state, laws of the host state, is the international law. And international law, basically, there are number of international organizations and monitoring international monitoring mechanism in place. There is provisions under Convention on Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. There's provisions in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. In addition to these conventions, there's also International Labor Organization, which have some sort of a democratic executive structure, which comprise of state representatives as well as employees and employers. So there are several monitoring mechanisms that is there. For instance, CEDAW, Convention on Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, it entails national governments. It asks national governments to take all possible measures to remove discrimination against women by any individual, organization, or corporation. So on paper, CEDAW would guide, or CEDAW would ask the national government of the home country as well as the host country to take all possible measures to remove violation of labor standards, violation of human rights, violation of gender discriminations. But uh, the fact is, most of these provisions are do not have enforcement. They fall short in they lack effective power of enforcement. Just to give you an example, that United States till date has not ratified CEDAW or International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. So when countries do not ratify, the provisions are there in place, the provisions are there on record in document, but they lack some sort of a power of enforcement. So there again, there's an opt-out clause, as I have mentioned. United States has not, which is uh, has not ratified, and therefore they are out of most of the provisions that these conventions have. There are also international bodies in addition to these international conventions and their provisions. One such body is the Commission of the Code of Conduct for Transnational Corporations. It was established in 1980s, but it failed during 1990s. It was replaced by what is known as the Global Compact. Now, global problem with Global Compact, what is like Global Compact is that its members are mainly multinational corporations and their trade associates. Just imagine of an international body which is there to regulate multinational corporations, but whose members are multinational corporations and their trade associates. We can clearly visualize the outcome that is going to be there out of such an international body. So, to conclude with this, I come to the conclusion of my presentation. So, to conclude, this multinational corporation have today become an inevitable aspect of global economy. We cannot do without it. And there are several plus points, merits that's often put forth by advocates of multinational corporations. They are sort of global Goliaths. They are present everywhere and they have huge contribution to world GDP. Yet we cannot deny the fact that there is massive violation of women's rights that takes place in these multinational corporations, and not just women's rights, human rights, rights, and several other kinds of rights. And we, as I've given you a brief outline about laws in the home state, laws in the host state, international law, there's no tangible standard. Therefore, the challenge is to build a standard for women and women's rights, a standard which will ensure women's rights in corporations, in multinational corporations. And such a standard has to be wide ranging and malleable. Malleable, why? Because multinational corporations operate in so many different areas, so many different countries, with women having different experiences, with women working in these corporations belonging to different backgrounds. So a one universal uniform standard is not sufficient. It has to be wide ranging and malleable, and it is a challenge, it is a task which needs to be at least attempted. With this, my presentation ends here. Thank you for your attention and thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, ma'am. It's amazing. We are very grateful to you for your outstanding presentation and giving us your valuable time. This session will be effective for our audience as you share your intelligent knowledge with us. Thank you, ma'am, for your valuable time.
Thank you.
Dear participants, after a short video clips, we come back to our question and answer session. Dear participants, this question and answer session time. You can send your question in our comment box and make sure to put it one by one so that our speaker would understand it well. So participants are requested to ask their question in our comment box. Our speaker ready to answer the question. Dear participants are requested to ask their question in our comment box. Ma'am, our first question from Evelyn. Can women be given higher position in the company during the time of your study? Thank you.
Okay, as far as I understand the question, Evelyn is trying to ask, can women be given higher position? Of course, women can be given higher positions, and there are women placed in higher positions in corporations and companies in today's time. When you say time of your study, I mean the today's time, the contemporary time. Yes, they are, but in terms of statistics, they are very few. Very few. When I say, I mean almost insignificant number. A huge majority of women working in corporations are placed at the bottom level of the position. Okay, there are two positions in the corporations, one with better paying jobs, good positions, good salary, and the other working in a very at the level of sustenance. They are given minimum wage, not even minimum wage, below minimum wage, and they are made to work in a very hazardous condition for long hours. And the women in this bottom position, in the lower position, they are overwhelming in number. There are a huge number of women who work in this position. There are a few, very few women placed in the higher position, but does not mean anything unless the condition of the vast majority of women working in the bottom positions and or lower positions in the corporations are taken care of, are tackled.
Thank you, ma'am. I hope ma'am Evelyn also understand your answer.
I hope so, Evelyn. I've answered your question. A straightforward question answer to your question is yes, there are women who are placed and women should be placed in higher position, but unfortunately, the number is too small.
Dear participants, we are still waiting for our next question.
I think there's no more questions. I think we can stop the session now.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you very much for your sharing your valuable time with us, and thank you from IGP, and thanks from our lovely participants.
Thank you.
Thank you,
So,
ma'am. We hope
okay,
we'll meet together in another session in IGP platform.
yes, okay, thank you. I'm leaving the session now. Then, is
Yes,
that
ma'am.
okay?
You can leave the
Okay,
session now.
okay,
Thank you very
okay.
much. Dear participants, some of our technical problem, we can't share our today's webinar code. So just collect the certification lead. We'll forward the code tomorrow or in a short time. Thank you very much.